Hello and welcome to episode 60 of Off the Bandstand. My name is Christian Wiggs. I am your host. Today's episode is Collin Shook, a pianist, composer, and the owner of Monk's Jazz Club, which has been the new home to Off the Bandstand. Collin has long been considered one of the foremost pianists in Austin, and for the past 5 years, he has curated a listening room environment through shows at the club. With over 200 unique streams, Collin continues to provide beautifully crafted and immersive live streams on a weekly basis. In this episode, we talk about the evolution of Monk's from pop-up shows in bicycle shops to the institution it is today. We also talk about the elements that contribute to his considerations as a band leader and the immediate panic induced from missed calls and out-of-town gigs. Moving on to the release of the week, this is Collin's Piano Tuning Suite from 2019, which follows a series of 7 solo piano improvisations documenting the tuning of a grand piano that was nearly a half-step flat. If you want to support this release directly, you can go over to Collin's Bandcamp, which is collinshook.bandcamp.com, and for all things Collin all the time, you can head over to his Instagram handle, which is @CollinShook. Now moving on to the Monk shows of the week, the 3 that we want to mention are the Pete Rodriguez Quintet on Friday, November 5th, then on the next Tuesday, November 9th, we have the Seth Weaver Quartet, and finally on Wednesday, November 10th, we have the Mike Saylors Quintet. Tickets are available for the limited in-person audience at monksjazzclub.com, and as always, every show will be live streamed with links to donate in the top right-hand corner of the screen. That is it for all of the shows that we want to mention this week. Let's dive into today's episode, episode 60, Collin Shook. This is Off the Bandstand. Over the past 18 months, I know this is a question that is probably really hard to consolidate down, but how have you just perceived the past 18 months of streams and just everything that's happened since March of last year?
I mean, it's a lot to think about. I've had a dream of having a club for many, many years, and finding the realization of that in a studio like this through all the streams during the pandemic, it's quite a wild experience. Yeah, it was always about the listening room, DIY, pop-up, dojo of a space to have the concerts, and then to start streaming from my house and then come over to my first studio just across the road and now this studio, and we've done like over 200 live streams, just sort of free out there into the world, into the ethos. It's a lot to process and a lot to think about. But I'm really proud of what we're doing here, and I'm glad that we're able to document, so many unique bands and configurations and just all the stellar jazz musicians here in Austin.
Yeah, man. Well, talking specifically about how Monk's made its way and like home in Austin, everybody loves a good origin story. You and I have a mutual admiration for superhero movies and origin stories. So for you, kind of what brought you to Austin in the first place, and where were you playing? Who were you playing with, and why Austin specifically?
So at a young age, I was born. And grew up playing piano. My mom was a piano teacher. She had a music school, and so I studied piano all the way until I was about 9 years old, and then started playing some classical guitar and horns in middle school, and drumline as well, just all kinds of different things. And I actually played drums in like a Coheed and Cambria, Mars Volta inspired rock and roll group for about 4 years.
Amazing.
And that was kind of crazy. But in moving to Austin, I was here 2007 and 8 and could barely get into the Elephant Room since I was 19 years old, 18 years old. But I saw all kinds of jazz around town. I had a few lessons here and there. And then I went out to Arizona to visit my dad for a couple months and ended up staying there, playing in the jazz scene there. I wrote and recorded 2 albums there, but I kept coming back to see family. My mom's still in Dallas. My oldest brother has his family and a bunch of stuff going on here in Austin, so I'd come back for South by Southwest and ACL and Christmas and Thanksgiving and all that stuff. And I just always really loved the jazz scene coming out of the Elephant Room and the Continental and everything. And, you know, Tucson's awesome, but it's a lot slower as far as the amount of gigs and just all the different things. And I chose to come back to Austin, you know, instead of New York and all those places that we dream of being a part of the scenes in. And I mean, that first month I moved back, I had one gig booked on piano. By the end of the month, I think I had played like 15 or 16 shows. People just calling me, hey, $75, $100, you know, can you make it? Sometimes 2 gigs in a night. And for like 3 years, I didn't get below that. You know, I think one month I tracked like 28 gigs or something. You know, it's pretty crazy. And a lot of that was not even me having to establish a relationship with the club or try to book myself somewhere. It was just other people calling me as a sideman pianist. And, you know, as far as the origin story and the hero's journey goes, you know, we're not going to do the whole dial, you know, but it's interesting to think about that time in my life of just nothing but going out to play the gigs and either biking or driving home. I loved biking up that Congress Hill. I lived off Congress and Oldtorf, going past Magnolia Cafe there at 3 a.m. after the gigs, and just playing the gigs, having some beers, waking up the next day and playing another gig. Just like 2 years of that. And just cutting my teeth, learning all the standards, playing with all the guys, and it eventually turned into these pop-up shows. Yeah, I forget the original question.
No. Well, I mean, it was very open-ended. Another part of that question, though, that I was curious about was who were some of those people that you ended up, because a lot of pianists come to town, or different sidemen, rhythm section players especially, go and then they play with so many different people in different configurations, because, you know, people who are not inside jazz, they go, oh my gosh, do all you guys, you guys are a band and you must practice together. But no, it's really just whoever gets booked on that certain configuration or whoever's available. So who were you playing with, and who did you find became long-term collaborators from the very get-go?
Well, definitely Danny Dufour. I think I remember that was one of the first gigs. He was the band leader on a gig at the Brass House, a club that used to be open on San Jacinto and 2nd.
Rest in peace.
Yes, and him and Sam Pankey, of course. Let's see, I was here 2014 at South by Southwest, and I ended up moving into a house with Sam Pankey and a guitarist and a few other buddies right there off the Old Torf and Congress. So Sam Pankey and Danny Dufour, definitely. I was very rarely playing with Ephraim Owens and Elias Hasslinger and a lot of those guys. I mean, Rich Harney was kind of the first call for all those guys. R.I.P. as well. He actually gave me his grand piano in 2015 when he got a new Yamaha. He gave me this old 1940s Kanabe Grand that I tuned up and did all this stuff. So
and that's the one that was on the majority of the streams, right?
Exactly. The first 4 years of Monks, that grand piano was sort of like where we would take the different art galleries and coffee shops and different stuff to do that. But you know, I studied with him a little bit and played with him as well. I was also playing a lot of upright bass at the time. For 2 years, I played with a girl named Emily Klepper, and the band name was Emily Klepper and the Coyotes, and it was kind of folk country swing, playing upright bass. You know, 4 or 6 gigs a month and all that stuff. So I got to play with Rich Harney a bunch on bass and a lot of people's different gigs. Of course, pianists don't really play with each other on gigs, but I did quite a lot of piano or double bass gigs with Gianni Bianchini, a fantastic piano player who's now in Quito, Ecuador, teaching that program. And, you know, Adrian Ruiz was one of the first guys that really called me, a fantastic trumpeter in town, to be in his band, his quintet all the time. He always asks the guys in his band to bring their own compositions. So we'd usually play 2 or 3 of my songs over the course of 2 sets. And just kind of go around the bandstand, and we made an album together and all that. So that's one of the few exceptions where it's like, hey, here's a group of 5 jazz musicians that always play in the same band for 4 years. You know, and there's a lot of chemistry that comes with that, as opposed to all the pickup gigs. And sometimes you play a gig with somebody, and then 3 years later you show up at another place, like, oh my God, it's been 3 years since we played. And other people you end up playing 12 gigs a month with. Like, I can't tell you how many shows Daniel has been the drummer, Danny Dufour, and Sam Pankey has been the bass player, and I've been the pianist on just any singer's gigs or a saxophone player comes through town or whatever. I mean, we've probably played so many gigs as pickup things, but I mean, there's so many so many different players and everything, but those would be the main guys in my mind right now.
Yeah. You were talking about how you had played drums a lot. You'd played upright bass on several gigs a month. And then obviously we know you primarily as a pianist. So how do you find that from a composition standpoint, playing all those different instruments, especially whenever, because we also know of you as a band leader, playing all those different instruments contributes to your understanding of connecting with those musicians, in balance too with just their flexibility, and then also composing tunes and kind of knowing what each one can do. How do you put that all together in your mind to create your compositions and your band leading style?
Well, I think it's a lot of just kind of organic conception of things when it comes to that. I used to play drums, especially when I was living in Tucson. I was pretty much playing just as much piano as I was bass and drums. And that's where I recorded my trio album. I wrote 10 or 11 songs, and I was playing with my trio, Matt Pierce and Dylan DeRobertis. And we were playing all over town and went and recorded that in one day. We did like 20 takes in total and picked the best 10, And then when I started playing bigger gigs, I called a trumpeter named Max Goldschmidt and a saxophone player, Mike Moynihan. And I was feeling very much inspired and influenced by the Joe Henderson sort of Blue Note era, especially that album Page One. And I kind of wrote like 4 songs based on tunes from that record, sort of like an inverted blue bossa thing.
Sure.
That's ascending and all that stuff, and then a song based on Jinrikisha and La Mesha and a few different tunes. And I feel like it's hard to sort of conceptualize what that feels like as far as the understanding and the influence of being a drummer, a bassist, and a pianist, and how that feeds into my compositions, or what I might say to my bandmates when I'm sort of leading a gig and leading a rehearsal, getting ready for a show, and like how I hear a tune and all that stuff. I feel like I just want energy,
Sure.
I want the players to lose their mind and get into these bleeding edge places where they're hanging off the cliff, and it's like, I might have a parachute, I might not, but if I jump off this, somebody else better come, fly down and grab me and pull their parachute, or,
Sure.
There's all kinds of metaphors about being on the edge of dissonance, and just sort of, in the markings on the sheet music, it might say loco. It's like, let's go nuts.
Yeah, right.
And then landing back to a place and just trying to really get into all the nooks and crannies and shove each other around and have a wrestling match with our instruments, or what we're doing. And it just seems like that. I feel like as a drummer and a bass player sitting at the piano, I'm constantly like trying to change things up and kind of push the bass player into this place and the drummer over here, and really repeat certain things to encourage or pick up on what the sax player did, and kind of steer the direction of my songs that way. So I haven't given that too much thought, but that seems like kind of an organic conception.
Is that for you, the audience, or both?
It's definitely for me. Screw the audience. No, I'm just kidding.
Tune in to live streams here at monksjazz.com.
I have had a long battle with how I think about jazz and its marketability, or, there's just, it's a very common thread. Anybody could say jazz is the lowest market share of albums sold, as if that's still a thing, for decades and decades. And they say, like, is this music for the band or is it for the audience? How do you guys connect? There's all kinds of different things and conversations around that. But I think that a lot of times the jazz has to be for the players. And you have to be trying ideas and having those conversations. And it's, there's many contexts and situations where the audience can be with you at every step of the way, hooting and hollering and saying, yeah, man, and, all those things, and killing and screaming, like, woo, and get into it. And there's other times where the audience doesn't even want to clap after solos because it's such a tender section of the song, or the whole framework of the song. All the musicians are so into it for themselves, and you could just, it's a very passive observation of the art from the audience. So I think more often than not, that jazz should be for the artist, the person on stage. And if people aren't that interested in it or they don't connect with it, I mean, they just should keep listening to more jazz until they get into it, or that's their personal preference.
For sure.
No big deal. But I think it's got to be for the musician.
Yeah, I think that people respond well to energy is the thing. Like we had people who came who were friends of mine who I did not expect to see whatsoever, not like as a dig, but just I didn't think it was their circle. They weren't in like the jazz circle of my friends or anything like that, that came to the John Mills times 10 show, but they just wanted to come and support and knew that it was like off the Bandstand Live and it was a big night, the 50th episode. And they pulled me aside after it was over and they were like, I had no idea that that is what jazz could be. They were like, that was so exciting. There was so much like high octane energy in the room. Everybody was like throwing down. The compositions were really cool. It didn't feel passive. It felt like aggressive, but not out of control either. And I think people just respond to that energy really well. So I feel like sometimes it is a moot point, like you were saying, to cater everything towards the audience because people just want to be wowed, like, and they also want to, and wow doesn't necessarily mean it needs to be this huge spectacle, in my opinion. It could be something that you bring them way in. I mean, you want to talk about something where you can totally grab people and it's super meaningful, but it's not flashy. In the Light of the Unfinished Moon, Sean Giddings' tune. I mean, like when he was playing that on the live stream, I was like, there's not a soul who could listen to this and go, next, you know, or whatever. Like it's so intimate and specific and heartfelt. So yeah, I totally agree, and I like that you say that it has to be for you because then in turn it's going to be for other people as well, because they're being. It's
more honest, which I think has a deeper impact, and it's sort of undeniable and uncanny that people would feel that if you feel it that way. I mean, most people hear jazz for 6 weeks in the grocery store, leading up to Christmas,
yeah, right.
or as mood music in a film or on TV. That it's very much a background. It's all, and 90% of what they hear of jazz, 99% of it is serving a background role to elevate something else, rather than, hey, this jazz concert on stage is like a movie. Turn off all the lights in the room, nobody talk, bring in the popcorn and the old fashioned, and let's watch this, you know, thing on film. Or on stage, you know.
Right.
And I feel like a lot of people steer so close to like the cool jazz or the cozy jazz. I mean, I hate to dog on trombone players, but I feel like there's so many trombone players that come up and either call Girl from Ipanema or One Note Samba.
Name names.
I'm not going to name names, but at all the jam sessions at Elephant Room and Stay Gold and everywhere else, it's just like trombone players only want to play super even, medium tempo Chopin tunes. You know, it's like, guys, let's throw down and go to fortissimo and have some crazy energy. And, you know,
I half expected as soon as you said that door to bust off the hinges and John Blondell comes in. And he's just like, you know.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. But I feel like so many people want to go to that safe, cozy place of jazz, and the cool jazz has its place. And if you can do it really well, it's beautiful. But I'm much more interested in a much more sort of schizophrenic set where a lot of it's super high energy and super manic. Then you come way down to this really sultry, you know, Middle Eastern European classical inspired ballad, and then a tune in 7, and then back to some really fast swing. Yeah. And then back to just a really deep, you know, 130 BPM groovy swing tune for a blues, you know, Mingus style shit, you know.
Well, and the reason why I asked you that too is specifically about how much you cater that towards yourself and then the audience is because I think whether or not people want to think of themselves this way, I think band leaders are curators, and they are, you know, to a certain extent as well. I won't even qualify it with to a certain extent. I'll say they are like producers in their own right because they are from start to finish, you know, if they're like playing their compositions or crafting a set, they are focusing on how it is going to be communicated as a whole. And so I was curious how you related to that because now having Monks, obviously you have a calendar where you're doing like 4 to 5 streams a week now, like including the East Austin Piano Shop stuff. So like you really have to make sure that you're curating something that, maybe there's not too much of the same thing right next to each other. So maybe I'll put this person here and I'm projecting about how you manage a calendar. But I'm curious, was that something that the idea of curation came as your development as a band leader, or even from a young age were you like, I'd like this to be here and this to be here? And, I remember, I know I just asked a question and I'm saying an anecdote, but whenever I was young, I remember, this is bad, it was more like directorial. I would, how you play like make-believe or dress up with your friends in like costumes or whatever. Maybe that's just me. But I would be like, okay, and then you say this now, and then I would say my thing. And I wasn't like letting a lot of room for them. I was trying to script it out. And so, I felt that directorial or producing or curation thing from a young age. Was that something that you had along the way or had early on?
I remember pretend, all that stuff as a kid. In different band configurations, let's say when I was on ensembles in band and different thing, of course you have your band director, there's all kinds of that stuff, but being in that rock and roll, being in that emo punk rock band in high school, I feel like maybe that was the first time I had more room to try that. We'd all write our own parts or maybe suggest to other people like, no, go to fret 5 instead of 7, Sure. Of course we were talking music, but who knows? Right. Or more like music names with the notes and all that. But I would say the directorial tendencies come and go, and I've learned a lot, especially about curating the series, that my initial opinions and impressions are not always the right thing, and that my sort of artistic criticism, or that if I'm in the moment at the control room being like, oh man, this guy should be swinging harder, all this stuff, like I have all these opinions, and I mean, there's no way I'm going to suggest it to the guys on stage or different things. It's interesting to think how much more over the last 18 months of streaming and producing the shows, that sort of my expectation versus the outcome. And I think there's a lot of inner turmoil that I've had just outside of music, that I've thought that the universe should be a different thing, or someone I'm dating should like me more instead of it's like I expect like, wait, this should be this thing, and the universe or the person's desires or the bands on stage or the politicians or whatever, they have different agendas and different mindsets about these things, and that I would let that difference in expectation versus reality really fuck me up and give me a lot of stress and turmoil and anguish in my life, and stress me out and make me sad and freak out. I feel like I've grown so much more in the process of running this project of Monks and having, I think we've had about 110 in-person shows since it's probably like 80 or something since we started opening up in April. And I think before that we had about 110, 120, I think we're over 200 streams. Just the live streams from the studio, where it was only the 5 or 6 musicians in the band. They show up an hour early. We do all the stuff. I kind of get an idea of what they're feeling and what they're talking about. They play their set. They're like, I didn't play very good tonight. It's like, you played great. Give it a day or two to listen back.
Right.
And kind of get the personal experiences and impressions from those people, versus having 36 people in here on a Friday night. We're at the 6-piece band, and having 36 people in here at 7:30, kicking them all out at 9:15, and having another 36 people come in for the 9:30 show. And just how the different people ask about, where's the bathroom? And, do you have any drinks? Or like, hey, can we sit over here and move this? And certain people get really neurotic, and there's just so many walks of life. And having it all in the same building, it kind of changes your mind. I feel like I've gained a lot of patience for what I expect things to turn out and how things should be in the moment. And maybe my sort of directorial tendencies of like, I want to be in control of how this is going, and realizing, hey, there's all these other people that want to do this thing. I've got the space. I'm allowing the opportunity and the time and the space for them to, follow their desires, especially in the midst of jazz and a late night thing. It gets a little crazy, but it's also strange because I've been playing as a band leader much, much less. So it's almost like a distant memory to think about what it was like in the rehearsal room or on the bandstand.
Sure.
And those tendencies. It feels like another life almost. But, so much of my field of view and my focus is on this series and all that stuff now. And I feel like I identify with that persona and that role so much that, like, this is all that I am,
Sure.
So yeah.
Amazing.
That's an interesting question. I hadn't thought about a lot of those things.
Well, I want to help us all to consider all of the things.
Absolutely. It's so interesting us having conversations in real life and all the memes that we have between each other, or the inside jokes, as the old timers would call it, and versus like being in a podcast, a filmed thing, and really reaching and trying to understand the nugget of truth and wisdom you're trying to bring out.
For sure.
Great.
Well, man, and that's, you and I talked before. This is now getting very meta, but no, I mean, you and I talked about just the show, and obviously you've been present for the show back in the control booth, like since we started doing like episode 51 with Andre, once we moved into the space, and I do try to keep it as natural as possible. Yes, maybe I'll dial in on some more things that maybe I don't always have the energy for in casual conversation, but I'll also find, and like, here's something, I went and visited my folks the other day, my mom and my stepdad, well, I guess it was a couple months ago now, but I went there with other people, and I asked them a question that was very much in the abstract, and they kind of just looked at me and they were like, what goes on in there? And I'm like, oh no, and then I got self-conscious. But I think that's something I was talking to Kat about this morning, was just reaching for some of the things that we don't normally think about, and trying to, because everything is crazy, and the universe, like you were saying, you can't control it, and everything is swirling around and hard to conceptualize. And so we all get preoccupied with our day-to-day activities, and so sometimes it's nice for me to just like stop and dig down into some of the more, like, some people might say deep. I don't really want to like think of it that way, where I'm like, oh my gosh, so deep. But I do want to think about more existential things, maybe, just because it finds me, or it allows me to find beauty and a lot of elements of life in places that I would have just been like, that's a field, it's a blade of grass. Like, art never used to grab me before, like paintings and watercolors and stuff like that. Like, I would go and look at them and I'd be like, yeah, like, it's beautiful, but it really doesn't do anything for me. And now I look at it and I go, oh, whoa, there's so many things that the artist could have been trying to convey. So anyways, tangent done about looking into the deeper things of life. But
that's the new song, Into the Deeper Things, or new album.
Yes. Can you go and write a song right now? Just sorry. I was about to say, I think we're wired in, even if we wanted to go over there. But, Off the Bandstand has really been shaped and molded a lot by the inspiration of what you've been able to accomplish with the club and starting Monks. I mean, it is no small feat, like I said before, and I've looked up to you as this like mentor, even though I haven't said it kind of in those words to you before. I've looked up to you and been like, hey, how do I do this, or how do I best reach this audience, or how should I, and kind of bounce talking points off of you. And obviously you have had a long time coming. You just celebrated 5 years of Monks. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Amazing. How long had you been kicking around the idea of Monks before the first year, or the first show started to come to fruition?
Well, let's see. I think I went to New York the first time in 2012, maybe 2011. And I kind of went maybe 4 or 5 times over those 3 years, anywhere from 3 weeks time to a week, just to go stay with old friends that I grew up with in Dallas, or I met a few musicians and was able to stay with them. I think I Airbnb'd like a total of 2 nights over the whole time. The rest of the time just staying with friends over all those trips. And just seeing Smalls and Fat Cat and the 55 Bar, Village Vanguard and Blue Note and Birdland, and just kind of going to Jazz Mecca,
Yeah, right.
And doing those pilgrimages, and coming back to Austin, and there being very little culture around either the management or the audience for there be a space to really just see the show and not be bothered by people's conversation next to you.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of those places in New York, they don't have they have an enforced whisper policy, but they don't have to enforce it because everybody's just pretty quiet, you know? Sure. I just remember playing piano at Elephant Room, so many gigs where there'd just be a group of 4 or 6 people, and they're just like, at those front 2 booths, the way the Elephant Room's designed, to where I couldn't even hear the bass player over them talking about kneeling on footballs and Trump and, or kneeling at the, whatever, or the debaucherous night before and just cackling about nonsense. We're up here trying to reach into the deepest parts and bring out this music and this meaning and stuff. And I mean, if certain places are about the hang and the jazz is more of the background, or it's like we said about the November, December jazz and the grocery stores and movies and all that, Elephant Room's a beautiful place. It's a great opportunity to come play gigs and get paid and play with the boys and cut your teeth and do all that. But they've, and there's nothing wrong with them not trying to be a listening room. It just doesn't even work in there, the configuration and everything. But even the other spaces, the Continental, the Brass House that was open at the time, the Stay Jazz Jam, a lot of these places are not trying to be listening rooms. And there's nothing wrong with having jazz in a place where people are trying to catch up and have a great Thursday night, 6 drinks deep. That's not what it's about. It's going to see that.
All sense of volume too goes out the window after about 3 drinks. So
right, and there's no sensitivity and dynamics and all that stuff on stage. Everything just has to be fortissimo. Maybe that's what's made me want to be a very edgy, loud band leader. But I remember doing a few kind of theater gigs and maybe touring with Adrian Ruiz. We did a few clinics at different universities. There'd be 60 or 100 students in the audience. We'd do all these solos, and it's just this huge war. And I mean, I've been to all these shows and all these things. And then Masumi Jones, a wonderful drummer in town, brought her trio, a piano player and a bassist from Japan, and they played at the Carver Museum on, I think that's 11th Street and Chicone or something. They have this little amphitheater with maybe 80 seats and a grand piano, and they rent out for events. And I had this idea, I guess it was early 2016, to think about, okay, how much does the band need to make? How much does the venue need to make? Can we get this audience in? And what if we started doing a series where it's 2 bands in a night, covers $15, and the people coming to see the show could see the opener and the late band, and let's do a theater style local jazz show, because we can't fill 800 seats at the Paramount or anywhere else.
Sure.
Let's go find a theater in a room where there's nothing else going on that Thursday night and put on a listening room jazz experience. And the desire to open a club and all those things, I mean, a lot of that seems so much like a pipe dream. And there's for the viewers at home, there's the article that the Austin Chronicle did for me by Michael Toland. Beautiful article. For some reason, the editor chose one line out of the thing and titled my article about my jazz project Pipe Dream. Yeah. And there were so many other things you could pull out of that interview. Anyway. And at the end of that, or in the summer of that year, friends of mine, I saw a video on Instagram of them sweeping up concrete dust in a big floor scraper, almost like a big, push mop or electric mop thing you use at a basketball gym, but it's got a bunch of razor blades and it's scraping the concrete. On this new place on 6th Street. It's an art gallery called Topology. It's $100, $200 a month for a 100 square foot, plot. There's 14 plots and a 900 square foot gallery and a little co-working office up front. I said, give me 2 of those. I want to bring my grand piano. I went and found 4 pounds behind Goodwill. Yeah. Put dry plywood on the top, a dolly in the center and each corner, so $5, and bolted it all together and put Rich Harney's grand piano on there. And then I would go to different spots and buy groups of 2 or 4 or 8 chairs at a time. And then all the cocktail tables you see here, I built 14 of those out of 2x4s from Home Depot. Yeah. Just pine. The cost was $14. We're not going to talk about wood costs in these days. And
let's talk about Bitcoin.
Bitcoin, that'll come later. That's the bonus content. We spent a month, I was helping him clean it up, build the little false walls for the gallery and all these things, I registered a page called Monk's Jazz. Put up a photo of Thelonious looking over the water and told people like, hey, we're weeks away from doing a BYOB, or I think we had a bunch of sponsors at the time from that art gallery. So it was open bar, $20 cover over here, but it's open bar to the public. $20 cover, listening room for 2 shows. And I think we had like 90 people show up to the first one.
Whoa.
It's like $1,800 budget to like pay the band, pay the venue, do all this stuff. And we did shows like every 2 weeks. And some shows only had 10 people show up or 15. But a lot of shows were getting 30, 40, 50 people to fill up this room. And it was this really like underground art gallery.
Yeah.
That used to be a tire shop and a warehouse that's going to be demolished in 4 months. The only reason we were able to get that space was because it was going to get demolished. But through that process of working with a bunch of other painters and fabricators, and one person was doing neon signs, and a bunch of like co-working tech guys in the front little air-conditioned office, and just trying to run these parties and other events with them, but then also transition into let's roll the dolly stage with the grand piano out there, build a whole thing, set up the tables and chairs with the candles. Great, we have all this stuff, but we got to go get cherries, maraschino cherries, and bitters, and sage for these other cocktails and all these other things, and just slowly have these like underground jazz parties. It was awesome. Of course, that place got demolished, and then some friends of mine suggested Fast Folks, this great bicycle shop, coffee shop on Cesar Chavez and Waller. And twice a month, she'd let us, pull all the bikes and different things out. And I think there was about 45 seats in that room.
Yeah.
And then the landlords wanted to do construction, so they bought her out of her lease early. And then I went to Revival Coffee on 7th Street. It was more like a 35-seat room. We just did another bunch of shows, and it all kind of pops up all over the place. And of course, that place closed down during the pandemic. I don't know, maybe Monks has a track record of shutting places down, but but who knows? I've got my own lease now. So,
sure, you do.
So I'm not going to bail on my own thing.
Right.
And I mean, that was, I guess that's a lot more of the, the lineage of how Monks started, but it was all born from the frustration of, there wasn't any manager or owner of a club that wanted to be like, cool, let's try listening to jazz nights and shush our customers.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to do that.
Well, of course, yeah.
And so I did it myself.
Yeah, and it's also hard to establish a brand new kind of like culture like that in a pre-existing place, right? So like if you're going to have a listening room, it needs to be from the onset so people know what they're getting whenever they go to it. And I think that what you've done too is created. I've told you this before. You've created a performance in a non-performative space, so you're getting the same level of quality and the same level of almost like intimacy that you would at a place like Paramount, but you're getting more intimacy because the band is here and the audience is feet away from you, just like a matter of feet away from you. So you're getting that intimacy, but it doesn't feel like you have to, get all dressed up, which there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I love like getting dressed up for like a fun night out or whatever, but it's just something where it's like, no, just come in. And it is very like hush hush, and everybody likes the idea of a speakeasy too, and it kind of has that idea about it where it's like, hey, you're promoting it out on social media and like online and stuff, but it's also a big part of it is word of mouth. I think I told you this before, but I went to the Apple store a few months ago at Barton Creek Mall, and I was getting an iPad, and they were like, well, I was trying to decide which one I was going to get, and they were like, well, what are you using it for? Because I was deciding between an Air and a Pro. And I was like, well, I'm mostly using it for like sheet music and stuff like that for whenever I'm like accompanying my students and stuff like that. And they were like, oh, you're a musician? And I was like, yeah. And they go, oh my gosh, have you heard of this club called Monks?
I remember you telling me this.
And I just like threw my head back and laughed. And I was like, absolutely, I've heard of Monks. Like,
that's great.
Colin's a good friend, and it just that kind of word of mouth thing too. So it does have that kind of organic reach as well. It fills such a niche. How also do you like that Monks has traveled around to different spaces? Do you like that it has that unique culture of where it was a pop-up for so long, and you got to experience different environments? So it showed that the music was not partial to just one space. I
think that's a really cool aspect, and I think that the audience that we've had for 5 years, they'll mention to me kind of every new space, like, man, this is a really great place. I remember when you were doing shows at the other place, you know, there's sort of a history and it's like, and scene.
Yeah.
Now it's a new scene, you know,
Yeah,
the movie, it's like the different aspects of that. And I mean, none of that was intentional. I mean, it's just, at first, I mean, why do I want to go pay 31 days a month of rent when I can rent like a coffee shop that's not going to be, they close at 6 p.m. anyway, or 4 p.m. on a Friday night. That's the time to do it. Let's get some beverage sponsors and the pan and all that. And just out of necessity, you know, certain places worked great for 6 months or a year and a half, and then the situation changed, and so we moved to a different spot. And so that was just kind of a natural thing, but I feel like there's a lot of intrigue and interest when it comes to new fans or people that came to a show at a different spot 3 years ago. They fell off, you know, off the face of the planet, you know, as far as Monk shows go. You know, maybe they came for like an entire year straight, and then they didn't come for 2 years. That's what I mean. They come to the new spot, and they just have all these things to say and really like the new space. And I feel like maybe it's improved my ability to, you know, have the flow of traffic and where the stage is going to be and the different things. I think it's a pretty cool aspect of it, for sure.
Yeah. Why specifically Monk? Why Thelonious?
Honestly, I mean, I love his music. I love his playing. I know he had a lot of mental health issues and was very like schizophrenic for a time. I went through a weird bout of that in my, you know, early 20s for about 6 months. And there was just this sort of like bond that I created with him, or his legacy and his music and all these different things. And I, of course, see Smalls in New York, and there were a bunch of other spots. And as far as like a marketing and business decision, I also thought, hey, there's 5,000 places in America. I looked up the copyright or the trademark thing. Monk's has been used for any kind of pubs or coffee shops or whatever across the country. And I just thought it was kind of a universal name, but in really leaning into Monk's, I mean, I guess it's hard to say that I didn't want to be totally referencing Thelonious, but it's also like a monastic pursuit, you know, and come into the dojo and throw down. It's like, be quiet during the ceremony, you know?
Yeah.
And I feel like that kind of just influences the people's experience and sort of sets the context and sets the canvas for what comes in. But I mean, a lot of that stuff, it's hard to think too deeply about all that. But definitely, I mean, Thelonious Monk's just such a cool, badass dude.
Yeah.
And his music was groundbreaking and revolutionary, and it's also the dojo.
Yeah, for sure. Man, something else that I feel like it holds a very special place in my heart is that over the years we've kind of run into each other, and then obviously this past year you and I have worked very closely together. But I remember one particular gig we have since talked about, a Tuesday evening in April or February of like 2018, it must have been, because I had that residency over at Stephen F's at the Stephen F. Austin, the Intercontinental Hotel on 7th and Congress. And you and I had played the first set. It was a duo gig. And then we go out onto the patio, and I was like, hey man, like, how's it going? How are things going? And at that point, I had just started to hear about Monk's, and you were like, oh, it's great, man. I just spent all morning building these like tables, and like, you know, I think you said you were having Johnny come in, if memory serves correctly.
Okay.
And or it could have been somebody else. But yeah, and we were talking about that, and then, you know, we probably took far too long of a break because we're just, you know, conversing over old fashions and looking at the traffic go and on Congress. But
very romantic scene there.
Very romantic scene between the two of us. Hey, look at us.
Not me.
Who would have thought?
Oh, my God.
Anyways.
Thank you, Paul Rudd. Thank you.
Paul Rudd, Hot Ones. This is got to be the next Hot Ones.
Yes.
But yeah, you and I started looking towards the conversation topic of, you know, really diving into influences. And at that point, I was really heavy into like the unschool of Kurt Elling, and I had kind of heard a lot of various opinions about diversify the portfolio, don't just listen to him. But I also knew that I really wanted to be in that school or that lineage of that specific like subset or style under the jazz kind of idiom umbrella. And you had given me a really big piece of advice that I ended up following, which was, you said, no, man, like you need to dive in fully. You need to fully study that person so you know them like the back of your hand. So that way, if you hear something that they are singing or delivering on a certain recording that you haven't heard before, you can anticipate exactly how they might phrase that next line of the standard. And that gave me the kind of affirmation to keep diving into that style and hear that. And you were citing Brad Mehldau at that time. So I'm curious, you know, whether it's Brad or other influences, like who are those influences that you carry with you? And do you still have that approach of diving into them fully and then moving on to the next one? Or do you like to keep a healthy balance of all the different people?
Well, I remember that conversation, and that's awesome that you're into Kurt Elling. I had no idea. I'm just kidding. And I love Brad Mehldau so much. I would study him and listen to him all the time. And I mean, I transcribed a few little pieces. I got a bunch of his books, but I lack discipline. I am very bad at homework. And pacing, you know, learning tunes. I will shed 9 pieces of original music for the big band at Elephant Room or something else, like the night before until 3 a.m. and then for like 4 hours a day before the gig, and like barely have the stuff under my fingers, even though I got the charge 6 weeks ago.
Sure.
You know, when it comes to that and transcribing, I feel like the thing that maybe made up for that in my playing was just listening to the same 5 records on loop for 8 years, you know?
Sure.
There's the Kurt Rosenwinkel, Joshua Redman, Brad Mehldau, Larry Grenadier, and Ollie Jackson. Or I think Jeff Ballard was on half that album too. I think it was The Next Step. That record, to me, I think that was like 2006 or something. That was like the new Miles Davis supergroup. Was like Kurt and Joshua and Brad and all those guys. Like, I listened to that album so many times. It's also the Brad Mehldau double disc live at the Vanguard where they play Black Hole Sun and Wonderwall and all those tunes, but they have like a 28-minute version of Black Hole Sun on there in front of a live audience. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the Joe Henderson catalog, which then really got me into McCoy Tyner. And especially young McCoy Tyner at that time, maybe like before Coltrane, or I guess some of that was after as well. He just had such a fire and a melodic sort of thing about him. And then the person I probably transcribed the most, which is saying like a total of 6 minutes of, you know, 1 minute solo here, 2 minutes solo there, and actually putting notes to paper, getting those in there, and then taking phrases I like and changing them into tritones away to have them in 4 keys so I could actually pull them out and anticipate where I wanted to play and do all this stuff. Keith Jarrett, his melodic concept and just his energy is just insane to me. And then I studied, or I was way into Aaron Parks, the pianist. There's also a drummer in Austin called Aaron Parks, who's a jazz drummer. But there's a jazz pianist named Aaron Parks, lives in New York, and he had played a bunch of Kurt Rosenwinkel. And I bootlegged a WBGO broadcast from the Village Vanguard with the Kurt Rosenwinkel Quartet with Aaron Parks on there. And I actually transcribed like 3 of his solos from that. And I mean, he's 5 years older than me, you know, or something. But I mean, he was releasing albums when he was 15. I think he came out of Seattle and he just kind of got an early start onto sort of international touring stuff. Who knows how that happens, but I actually got a few lessons with him when I was in New York in 2013 or 2014. And went to his apartment, his little grand piano, and we talked about the different things. You know, there's rhythm, harmony, and melody. Harmony's in the brain, rhythm is in the body, and melody is the spirit. And like, here's these different exercises to sort of activate those portions of how you want to play. And, you know, the premise was that a lot of us jazz musicians have spent so much time in our brain thinking about harmony, and that our melodies are made up of harmony rather than them being that spirit and that forward and that, you know, undeniable, uncanny thing. I think uncanny is the wrong word there. Where I would just sit down and play a G and a C, a fifth, just boom, boom, and then you'd sing a 3 or 4 note phrase. Ba-da-ba-ba. Just got that drone in there. Wait 10 seconds. Take another breath. Da-ba-da-da, da-da-ba-ba. You know, just these like melodic activation things. And the other ones are just like rhythmic activations and stuff. And that really, taking that home, I mean, of course, I recorded it with my iPhone voice memo app and took that home and transcribed a few more of his solos and stuff. And then I decided I'm not going to transcribe anymore.
Yeah.
I'm going to do my own voice. And I spent so long wanting to sound like Brad Mehldau, ripping off 3 or 4 of his little signature licks, you know, repeating these things over here while you play a melody in left hand. If you listen to Brad Mehldau, he's got all these like really cool devices, but he uses them a lot. But he's masterful at all of them. But I never really transcribed enough of it, so I would always be hearing something and not be able to execute it. And therefore, I felt like every solo I played that I failed at developing and building this skyscraper and this tower of beautiful stuff. And then like at the end of the solo, you knock it down. It's like I always just stopped before the project was finished, and it never came out that pretty. And it's just like another failure. You know, I mean, maybe that's a weird way to think about it, but hearing a certain sound and not being able to approach it, it feels like you've never really had that killing of a solo or whatever. I spent a couple of years kind of in a weird place like that, where I thought everything I played sounded like shit, you know? And everybody's like, wow, great gig. You sound great. I'm like, shut up. You don't know what you're talking about. You know, it's so strange.
Right.
But especially when it comes to like soloing and taking the influences and then like improvising it on the bandstand, most music is rehearsed and people come up with their guitar solos and their lines, and they play that same solo at every show on their tour. And it's about making the audience hear the best part that we've all come up with. Hey, why are you improvising? Like, play the best part that we've all composed together, you know? Whereas us jazz musicians think that we're some sort of special breed of people that everything I play must be improvised. And I'm going to create something new and beautiful every night, and then you're going to clap for me after I'm done, you know? Sure. And there's this sort of vanity and insanity behind all that. But there's a lot of ego and ego death and all those things, and I felt like I should stop transcribing and just sort of follow my own path, play the standards with the different people on the bandstand, and I always think I'm going to get back into transcribing and working on technique, but I mean, I haven't practiced piano in like 6 years, you know? Aside from sitting down to learn, you know, dun 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 ba-bong.
Yeah, sure.
For a chart, but I'm not saying they're, you know, practicing hand-in or transcribing or doing anything like that. But I mean, if you're playing 20 nights a month, maybe that keeps you up enough to where that is the practice.
Well,
you know?
It is the shed, yeah.
It is the shed, so it's different. But, you know, I've long wanted to transcribe and work and keep some more of those influences and continue growing. But as being a piano tuner and then running the Monks shows, and now that I'm doing this 9 days a week, you know, sorry, that's such a dumb thing to say.
No, it's great. It's great.
And putting on, you know, 4 or 5 shows and 3 recording sessions and tuning 3 pianos and then tuning or moving another grand piano and moving 2 more uprights, and just the insanity of all the different jobs that I have right now and trying to keep this going. I have, like, it doesn't even enter my mind, the idea of leading a band, practicing. Let's write a new album and publish something. Like, I don't want to go into the studio and lay down like a real album, but I'll play a live stream, you know, it's kind of similar, but it's an interesting relationship with the influences and the masters that I used to follow and idolize, you know.
Yeah. Awe-inspired, man, of what you've been able to create here. It's truly inspirational, and everyone in town knows it, man. And everyone not in town who's watching the stream knows it as well. Well, Collin, I want to ask you 2 quick speed round questions that are the end of every episode. Of course, you already know these are coming. They're hardly a surprise. You've been present for all of these different episodes.
But I don't know what the questions are, or do I?
You may.
Okay, let's go.
You can probably guess.
Let's go.
The first speed round question is, if there's a record that you would suggest everybody go check out immediately after they finish this episode, what would it be and why?
I think I would go back to probably one of my favorite records as far as a pianist that I got from the Tucson Public Library, probably in like 2011. And it's a pianist from Italy. His name is Stefano Bolani.
Okay.
And it's called Piano Solo. And it has some of the weirdest, like manic classical sort of inspired piano playing. Just these weird like little figures that layer on top of each other and all this stuff. And then some of the most swinging stride solo piano and like Keith Jarrett, Meldau-esque, just like amazing American solo piano jazz stuff, and then back to this weird like frenetic, just all these crazy things, sort of European inspired, and then American like swing solo jazz piano. Stefano Bolani, Piano Solo.
Very hip, man. I'm going to check it out. I'm very excited about it. And the final question is that we all have gigs from hell where things go totally sideways. Can you think of a particular gig that seemed like it came from the deity down under?
Harlan Hodges had a gig just before me that Graham Reynolds, a piano player in town, he wrote the music for a touring comic book live show called The Intergalactic Nemesis.
Okay.
And there's a Foley with 10 or 12 little doohickeys and a little wind machine and doorknobs and shoes in the gravel and all that stuff and a bunch of mics. 3 voice actors and a pianist doing an old like 1920s radio show about these this female Indiana Jones reporter style type person.
Okay.
And then all these other characters that find out aliens have this invasion and there's all these things happening and it's just this pulp, you know, silly, comedic, ridiculous thing that they have a 40-foot projection of the thing with a big audience. And it's a great fun show.
Yeah.
Graham Reynolds wrote all the music for it. Harlan Hodges had the gig right before me and I got the gig. And there was yet another thing that I was the last person to be on the tour of the thing. Similar to like Muggs has shut down multiple clubs, existed in their last gasps of life. I was also the last piano player. I mean, they were already planning to end the tour or end the run, but I missed the flight to Ohio or Pennsylvania or wherever we were going. Man, we did a tour to Alaska in January, played Fairbanks and Eugene or whatever. Oh my God, it's like -20. It was so insane. We did a few runs with them and everything, but for some reason, I think I played a gig at the Elephant Room or somewhere, and I wasn't done until 2 a.m. Flight was at 7. So I'm gonna stay up. And I probably fell asleep at like 5 or 6 or something on the chair.
Man.
Wake up at 8. Freaking out. 20 missed calls from the different tour managers and the other musicians and everything. And luckily, I got another flight, and they landed in a city that they were driving 2 hours away to play the theater gig. Yeah. And the gig wasn't until the next night anyway. Okay. So there were 2 rented cars, and luckily they stayed and picked me up. But like, that's just like the most embarrassing thing. And then they had different. I remember one more thing about that. There was 3 different books. They actually had comic books and everything. Sure. But it's like movie 1, 2, 3 of Indiana Jones or Star Wars or whatever, trilogy. Sure. And they had them on the computers in like PowerPoint or whatever the thing of the day was. And somehow, in restarting or changing something, the tech person running that stuff, deleted the second show. Because they had played the first show. But the first show was still on the computer, and so we'd been rehearsing the second show, and we ended up having to play the first show on the fly.
Oh, man.
And so I was like pulling up my Dropbox and trying to download the files. It was like an hour before showtime, But we killed it. We nailed it, because I played that show like 10 or 20 times. But I mean, the obligation and the touring and the like very narrow window of timing and everything like that, ever since, if I have a gig, my mom still lives in Dallas, I'll drive it back and forth, but of the 100 times I've made that trip, 3 or 4 times, the transmission falls out on I-35 when you're in Waco. It's like, if I have a gig in 3 hours, that's the last thing I want to do. So I always travel the day before.
Yeah.
Now because of that.
Amazing. Whew, well, I'm glad that it worked out because I could have gone a very different way. But yeah, the sheer panic that sets in when you see those 20 missed calls is like, you're in hell. You're in gig hell, and then, or at least purgatory. And then you ended up making it through.
And that's the only gig I've ever been late. Yeah. That's the only time I've ever been late in life, guys. Just to let you know.
Officially.
Yeah.
Officially.
Yeah. It's never happened before or again.
Will happen again. Can confirm. Well, Collin, man, thank you so much for finally having an episode, man. I know we've been trying to do this for some time, but it is so fitting that we waited until after the days of Zoom so we could be in your home.
The days of Zoom and wine glasses. Sorry, bad.
That's going to go on the record.
It's a good one.
Collin,
look at us.
Look at us.